Struggling to find a good watercolour sketchbook? Here are 7 reasons to DIY one so that it actually fits the way you paint. Most store-bought watercolour sketchbooks, well, the paper is fine, but it's usually not great. And the better the paper, the more expensive, obviously. This is really a sticking point when it comes to sketchbooks. Well, actually most art supplies. If they're too expensive, you feel worried about ruining them. If they're too cheap and nasty, they're difficult to work with. But when you make your own, you get full control over the paper. The brand, the weight, texture, cotton, cellulose, cold press, rough, whatever makes you happiest, you can choose. And if you're a paper nerd like me, this is a total game changer. Right now, I'm painting roses on what will be the final spread of my handmade sketchbook. It's a forgotten project that I rediscovered the last time I tidied my studio. The full story is in the video in the cards, and I've been making a playlist of these videos as I fill the sketchbook pages. But for this project, I chose Fabriano Artistico paper, which is one of my favorites. It is cold press 300 GSM, and it's an absolute delight to paint on, even having lain around in the studio after all these years. As you can see, I've cut it down so that the pages are small and square, and that brings me to the second reason to make your own sketchbook. When you make your own sketchbook, you also control the size and the shape. So whether you want something narrow and wide, or tiny and square, or wildly impractical but irresistibly cute, all the options are available to you. Store-bought books do come in a few sizes, but by the time you've found acceptable paper and a price that you're happy with, it can be tricky to also achieve the ideal size. But a handmade book can be exactly as you want it to be, the perfect size and shape for your intended project or working location, or to meet whatever your particular requirements might be. Now, you may have noticed that I'm painting a double page spread, and I'm painting it completely flat, which is very easy because I've chosen to paint before I do the binding. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. I don't think I would do it this way again in the future. But the issue of whether your sketchbook is flat when it is open is another thing that you can actually control when you are making your own book. Sometimes they're so tightly bound that when you're trying to paint on those middle pages, it's very hard to force the book open and flat far enough for you to make painting nice and easy, and especially if you're trying to paint outside of the house or something like that. Of course, there are some sketchbooks available with a ring binding that will open perfectly flat, but then you are sacrificing the ability to do a double page spread unless you're okay with that big metal coil splitting the center. You'll find quite a few binding tutorials, and they all have slightly different aesthetics. But when you're choosing one, if having the book open flat is important to you, it's something to be aware of at that point. I think reason number 4 to create your own watercolor sketchbook is that the binding itself can be its own creative joy. You might discover that you actually love the process of stitching and folding and putting something together from scratch. It's a whole craft in and of itself. And even if you're not aiming for perfection, I'm certainly not, it's incredibly satisfying to hold a book you physically made with your own 2 hands. It is quite a project, and it does need a few extra tools. This is where it usually starts to become quite clear whether this is something you might enjoy or whether it's simply a right palaver you'd prefer to avoid. To be honest, you don't need much. You can use dental floss as opposed to waxed thread to slip through the paper smoothly. But of course, it's your sketchbook. You can also choose some pretty twine or embroidery thread and just give it a go. Most of us tend to have a darning needle about, and you will definitely need that. I must be honest, I do have an awl. I bought it years and years ago. This is the first time I've ever actually used it, and it really did make the job a bit easier. You know what it's like. Us crafty types love a bit of extra kit, don't we? But I'm sure a skewer of some sort would do perfectly well. Just mind your fingers on the other side. You'll find lots of tutorials on bookbinding available. I used one of C. Lemon's very beginner-friendly tutorials for a French cross binding, and I'll link that in the description in case you do want to have a go at this yourself. Making your own watercolour sketchbook means you have the choice to do the binding either before you paint or after you paint. You can see that when I made this book, I decided to paint all the pages first. And I did that because I thought it would be a good idea for me to be able to leave out anything I didn't like. In theory, that sounded like freedom, but in reality, it made every page feel like it had to be good enough to earn its place in the book. And that's really not what I think a sketchbook should be about. It's also probably why I left this project and abandoned it all those years ago and didn't have the kind of courage to keep going with it. So yes, you can bind it afterwards, but it might create extra pressure that you didn't anticipate, and that is definitely something worth bearing in mind. One of the things that does make it easier to fill a sketchbook is being able to control the number of pages, and that's another reason to create your own book. Sometimes the prospect of filling an entire sketchbook is a bit daunting. Most sketchbooks feel endless, but a handmade one, you can make it tiny, just a handful of pages, and there's something very freeing about that. Small projects feel doable, and finishing a sketchbook is suddenly very achievable. Another great thing about being able to create your own sketchbook is that you can get really creative with all sorts of extras. You can really customize the sketchbook to make it exactly what you're looking for. As we've already established, bookbinding can be a lot of fun in its own right. And when you're designing your sketchbook, you get to decide how fancy you'd like to be. So perhaps you want to add tip-ins, pockets, little fold-outs, all the paper crafty things you've secretly wanted to try. You can add them in or not. It's completely up to you. So should you make your own watercolour sketchbook? I'm guessing you've already figured out by now if it's something that set your creative heart aflutter or had you rolling your eyes and scrolling on Amazon to find one instead. If you're frustrated with the sketchbooks that you can buy, and if you're open to the idea of exploring the exciting world of bookbinding, I can tell you it's an awful lot of fun, even if it has taken me about 10 years to finish. And if you want to hear the rest of that story, it's all in the video I'm popping up on the screen now. It's the one you'll want to watch if you've ever started a project that you just don't seem to be finishing. In the meantime, shall we flip through the finished journal? It is terribly satisfying to have an entire journal that you know you not only painted, but also designed and assembled. Worth a try. Happy painting.